Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is April 18, 2020, and this is an audiobook of Karl Marx's letter to Abraham Lincoln with some background information on Emancipation Day. Before we get into the video, if you could just hit the like, share, subscribe, and comment. All of that interaction helps to boost this video and helps more people to see content from this channel. You can also follow us at facebook.com/socialismforall. Support us at patreon.com/socialismforall for as little as $1 a month. And thanks to our current patrons, I spend upwards of 20 hours a week on this new channel, and all of that support is greatly appreciated. So, although this is actually the 29th or 30th video that I've put up on the Socialism for All YouTube channel, it's actually one of the first that I got the idea to do, one of the first things I wanted to do with the channel. I just think it's an interesting topic. A lot of people in the U.S. Studied Abraham Lincoln and Civil War history in grade school and high school, but very few of us in U.S. history studied anything having to do with Karl Marx, even though Marxist thought was a huge part of the U.S. labor movement and movement for socialism, which really did help to shape a lot of mainstream politics in the United States, even though it was a subcurrent and definitely below the radar as far as mainstream bourgeois society was concerned. Yet, Lincoln and Marx were contemporaries, and they were in communication with each other, as this correspondence reveals. So, as I mentioned, I'd been wanting to do this video for a while, and the thing that actually gave me the impetus to get up and do it today was my calendar. Today is the 18th, and a couple days ago was the 16th. And I use I go to a website where you can just print out PDF calendars and you can check a bunch of options, including, adding on all the sort of unusual religious and world holidays that, you maybe never heard of. So I checked those just because it's interesting to see, World Teach Fishing Day or whatever. But this one was Emancipation Day, April 16th in Washington, D.C. And I thought, have I heard of that before? So I went and looked it up. And I learned from Wikipedia that Emancipation Day is observed in many former European colonies in the Caribbean and areas of the United States on various dates to commemorate the emancipation of enslaved people of African descent. It is also observed in other areas in regard to the abolition of serfdom or other forms of involuntary servitude. And hopefully one day we will have an Emancipation Day across the world from wage slavery when worldwide socialist revolution succeeds. Still waiting on that. But, as Marx's historical materialism teaches us, humanity has been progressing through successive eras of political and social change due to technological improvements in the way that industry is conducted and the way that society is organized around producing the material things, food, shelter, entertainment, and everything else that we consider, things that make human life worth living and interesting. And the last transition was of a major epoch was from feudalism to capitalism, due in large part to the Industrial Revolution, inventions like the steam engine, and that basically made the social organization under feudalism obsolete. It paved the way for capitalism, and now capitalism needs to be overthrown because it is creating two classes. One very large class called the proletariat, which is dispossessed workers who have nothing to sell but their labor, have no private property, and then capital, which is a gigantic amount of wealth consolidated in the hands of a very few. And rather than simply redistributing that wealth to make people middle class, we as socialists advocate for the abolition of private property and for that capital to be held in common by the working class. So we can see from the Wiki article that even in the U.S., different states where it's observed celebrate Emancipation Day on different days. Florida holds it on May 20th. Georgia has been doing it since May 1866. They hold it on the Saturday closest to May 29th. They believe it to be the longest continuously running annually observed emancipation event in the United States. D.C., as my calendar showed me, celebrates it on April 16th. Mississippi celebrates it on May 8th. Texas celebrates it on June 19th. Kentucky celebrates it on August 8th. Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory, celebrates it on March 22nd. And the U.S. Virgin Islands, also a territory, celebrates it on July 3rd. So not a great amount of agreement on the date there. It seems to be held during the warmer months. But let's go into Washington, D.C.'s description. This is from the Washington, D.C. government homepage. A historical overview of D.C. emancipation. April 16, 1862 marks the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. Over 3,000 enslaved persons were freed 8 months before the Emancipation Proclamation liberated slaves in the South. The district also has the distinction of being the only part of the United States who have compensated slave owners for freeing the enslaved persons they held. Comment, so in a sense, the government sort of bought the slaves from the slaveholders and then set them free. Free, that is, to compete for work under capitalism as wage slaves. And in fact, I'd like to call up an earlier document by Marx's partner, Engels, Friedrich Engels. This is called The Principles of Communism. Audiobook is on the YouTube channel. Number 7 from this document, in what way do proletarians differ from slaves? And Marx and Engels' answer was, the slave is sold once and for all. The proletarian must sell himself daily and hourly. The individual slave, property of one master, is assured an existence, however miserable it may be, because of the master's interest. The individual proletarian, property as it were of the entire bourgeois class, which buys his labor only when someone has need of it, has no secure existence. This existence is assured only to the class as a whole. The slave is outside competition, the proletarian is in it and experiences all its vagaries. The slave counts as a thing, not as a member of society. Thus, the slave can have a better existence than the proletarian, while the proletarian belongs to a higher stage of social development, and himself stands on a higher social level than the slave. The slave frees himself when, of all the relations of private property, he abolishes only the relation of slavery, and thereby becomes a proletarian. The proletarian can free himself only by abolishing private property in general. So that kind of sums it up. That's the end of the section there. So my comments again. That kind of sums it up. We have a form of social organization and industrial production in which workers are counted as property of the plantation owner, which plantation really means like corporation. We think of it as a farm, but it really means like a business entity, is abolished on Emancipation Day and then later throughout the United States with the Emancipation Proclamation. So going back to the DC webpage, the struggle to end slavery in the district was long and arduous. From the city's beginning, various individuals and groups with often diverse motives signed anti-slavery petitions, wrote negative newspaper articles, and openly deplored the wide-open practice of slavery and slave trading that occurred all over the city. Incidents such as Nat Turner's 1831 rebellion in Virginia and Snow Riot of 1835, the Pearl Affair and Riot in 1848, and the presence of the local Underground Railroad also highlighted the issue of slavery in the district. As thousands of blacks flocked to the nation's capital seeking a haven from bondage during the early years of the Civil War, pressure increased on President Abraham Lincoln to take a bold step. With the help of Henry Wilson of Massachusetts, Lincoln got the bill through Congress. On April 16, 1862, he issued the following document. Fellow citizens of the Senate and House of Representatives. The act entitled An Act for the Release of Certain Persons Held to Service or Labor in the District of Columbia has this day been approved and signed. I have never doubted the constitutional authority of Congress to abolish slavery in this district, and I have ever desired to see the national capital freed from the institution in some satisfactory way. Hence there has never been in my mind any question upon the subject except the one of expediency arising in view of all the circumstances. If there be matters within and about this act which might have taken a course or shape more satisfactory to my judgments, I do not attempt to specify them. I am gratified that the two principles of compensation and colonization are both recognized and practically applied in the act. In the matter of compensation, it is provided that claims may be presented within 90 days from the passage of this act, but not thereafter, and there is no savings for minors, femmes, covert, insane, or absent persons. I presume this is an omission by mere oversight, and I recommend that it be supplied by an amendatory or supplemental act. Abraham Lincoln, Washington, April 16, 1862. And that published text of the Emancipation Decree in the District of Columbia is from Frank Leslie's Illustrated Weekly. So the site continues, news of Lincoln's action raced through the city. The joy in the district's black community was dramatic and profound. One black district citizen wrote to a friend in Baltimore, quote, "This indeed has been a happy day to me, sights I have witnessed that I have anticipated." He then described how he gave the happy news to two female friends of his, one of whom had an enslaved son. When I entered, they perceived that something was ahead and immediately asked me, "What's the news?" The district's free says I pulling out the National Republic and reading its editorial. When I had finished, the chambermaid had left the room sobbing for joy. The slave women clapped their hands and shouted, left the house saying, "Let me go and tell my husband that Jesus has done all things well," while the cook, who is free, retired to another room to offer thanks for the blessings sent. Should I not feel glad to see so much rejoicing around me? Were I a drinker, I would get on a jolly spree today. But as a Christian, I can but kneel in prayer and bless God for the privilege I've enjoyed this day. Would to God that the law also applied to Baltimore, but a little patience and all will be well. The Anglo-African, a black newspaper published in New York, placed the event into a national perspective with an editorial that included the following words. It was a fitting celebration of the anniversary of Fort Sumter, that Congress should pass a bill to emancipate the capital from the thrall of slavery forever. Henceforth, whatever betide the national, its physical heart is freed from the presence of slavery. April 16 remained a special day in the hearts of the district's black residents. On the first Emancipation Day anniversary after the end of the Civil War, the city's black community organized a huge parade. The District of Columbia Emancipation Day Parade became an annual event that continued into the early years of the 20th century. And that was written by C.R. Gibbs, historian. So we have some thanks to Jesus there. Of course, let us also turn to some faces behind the scenes of the political fight to advance out of this backward system and to get to a higher level of social order and social justice and socialism. So this is from Marxists.org. It's from the notes of the International Workingmen's Association, 1864. The address of the International Workingmen's Association to Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States of America. And this was presented to U.S. Ambassador Charles Francis Adams, January 28th, 1865. There's a footnote there from the minutes of the General Council of the International. Dr. Marx then brought up the report of the subcommittee, also a draft of the address, which had been drawn up for presentation to the people of America, congratulating them on their having re-elected Abraham Lincoln as president. The address is as follows and was unanimously agreed to. So this was written by Marx between November 22nd and 29, 1864. First published in the Beehive newspaper, number 169, November 7th, 1865. Transcription by Zodiac, Brian Baggins, and the online version is the Marx and Engels Internet Archive, Marxists.org, 2000. Sir, we congratulate the American people upon your re-election by a large majority. If resistance to the slave power was the reserved watchword of your first election, the triumphant war cry of your re-election is death to slavery. From the commencement of the titanic American strife, the working men of Europe felt instinctively that the Star-Spangled Banner carried the destiny of their class. The contest for the territories which opened the dire epopee, was it not to decide whether the virgin soil of immense tracts should be wedded to the labor of the emigrant or prostituted by the tramp of the slave driver? When an oligarchy of 300,000 slaveholders dared to inscribe, for the first time in the annals of the world, slavery on the banner of armed revolt, when on the very spots where hardly a century ago the idea of one great democratic republic had first sprung up, whence the first declaration of the rights of man was issued, and the first impulse given to the European revolution of the 18th century, when on those very spots counter-revolution, with systematic thoroughness, gloried in rescinding, quote, the ideas entertained at the time of the formation of the old Constitution, and maintained slavery to be, quote, a beneficent institution. Indeed, the old solution of the great problem of, quote, the relation of capital to labor, and cynically proclaimed property in man, quote, the cornerstone of the new edifice. Then the working classes of Europe understood at once, even before the fanatic partisanship of the upper classes for the Confederate gentry had given its dismal warning, that the slaveholders' rebellion was to sound the tocsin for a general holy crusade of property against labor, and that for the men of labor, with their hopes for the future, even their past conquests were at stake in that tremendous conflicts on the other side of the Atlantic. Everywhere they bore, therefore, patiently the hardships imposed upon them by the cotton crisis, opposed enthusiastically the pro-slavery intervention of their betters, and, from most parts of Europe, contributed their quota of blood to the good cause. While the working men, the true political powers of the North, allowed slavery to defile their own republic, while before the Negro, mastered and sold without his concurrence, they boasted it the highest prerogative of the white-skinned laborer to sell himself and choose his own master. They were unable to attain the true freedom of labor, or to support their European brethren in their struggle for emancipation, but this barrier to progress has been swept off by the Red Sea of civil war. The working men of Europe feel sure that, as the American War of Independence initiated a new era of ascendancy for the middle class, so the American anti-slavery war will do for the working classes. They consider it an earnest of the epoch to come that it fell to the lot of Abraham Lincoln, the single-minded son of the working class, to lead his country through the matchless struggle for the rescue of an enchained race and the reconstruction of a social world. Signed on behalf of the International Workingmen's Association, the Central Council, and a number of signatures below. The minutes of the meeting also continue, quote, "A long discussion then took place as to the mode of presenting the address and the propriety of having an MP with the deputation. This was strongly opposed by many members who said working men should rely on themselves and not seek for extraneous aid. It was then proposed and carried unanimously. The Secretary corresponded with the United States Minister, asking to appoint a time for receiving the deputation, such deputation to consist of the members of the General Council." So later, there is a reply from Ambassador Adams. Ambassador Adams replies, "Legation of the United States, London, 28th January, 1865. Sir, I am directed to inform you that the address of the Central Council of your association, which was duly transmitted through this legation to the President of the United States, has been received by him. So far as the sentiments expressed by it are personal, they are accepted by him with a sincere and anxious desire that he may be able to prove himself not unworthy of the confidence which has been recently extended to him by his fellow citizens and by so many of the friends of humanity and progress throughout the world. The government of the United States has a clear consciousness that its policy neither is nor could be reactionary, but at the same time it adheres to the course which it adopted at the beginning of abstaining everywhere from propagandism and unlawful intervention. It strives to do equal and exact justice to all states and to all men, and it relies upon the beneficial results of that effort for support at home and for respect and goodwill throughout the world. Nations do not exist for themselves alone, but to promote the welfare and happiness of mankind by benevolent intercourse and example. It is in this relation that the United States regard their cause in the present conflict with slavery, maintaining insurgents as the cause of human nature, and they derive new encouragements to persevere from the testimony of the working men of Europe that the national attitude is favored with their enlightened approval and earnest sympathies. I have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servant, Charles Francis Adams." So in closing, of course, it's worth noting that that letter is from January 28, 1865. A few months later, the South started to surrender, and then by the end of 1865, the war was officially over. I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you for listening to this recording. I hope you found it informative and educational. Again, you can follow us at facebook.com/socialismforall. Thanks to our current patrons supporting us at patreon.com/socialismforall, where you can support us for as little as $1 a month. All of those donations are much appreciated, and we'll be back soon with more audiobooks and current events analysis from Socialism for All.